Okay. Welcome again. We're all here to talk about the Title I 1003 School Improvement Grant. Alice is here as well. I'm Sarah McCaslin, a Texas Tutoring Grant Specialist, but I also support work in the Division of School Improvement. Alice, do you want to say hi to your fan club, I'm sure?
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Grant Launch webinar. I'll be answering questions in the chat as they come through, and if there are significant questions, we will post an FAQ after this. So feel free to drop those in and we can capture them and support you all through continued question answering in the chat and live. Thanks, Sarah.
If you do have any more specific questions after the fact, feel free to reach out to either one of us. But again, like Alice said, if there's a heavy lift of questions, we'll make sure that that gets posted so that you have access to those resources. All right, we'll start with the school improvement grant, just a general overview and any updates, and then we'll dig into the application process, both through the eGrants portal and then what it looks like to navigate the targeted improvement plan through Plan for Learning or 806 technologies. And then afterwards, we'll spend a brief moment talking about linking funds to the targeted improvement plan. And then we'll end with some key takeaways and reminders. If you have questions, drop them in the chat. Alice will answer them as we go or interject if it's pertinent for everybody. And then we'll have a time for question and answer at the end as well. All right, so the Title I 1003 School Improvement Grant is a non-competitive school improvement grant for LEAs that have at least one Title I served comprehensive support and improvement identified campus. The application itself will open up on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, September 13th. And then of course, the grant will run the 2022-2023 school year. I feel like we should have done a drum roll for the next slide, but great news. Each campus that's awarded the grant will receive $43,000. The kind of guidance we gave up until this point was to plan for about 10,000, but we're happy to announce that that is significantly more than anticipated. So you can plan for that 43,000 per campus. And then your LEA is also able to retain any unused funds from 21-22. So carryover will populate within this grant as well. So requirements are still pretty standard for the SIG. The campuses are expected to engage in the Effective Schools Framework continuous improvement process, which includes self-assessments, diagnostics, and then of course the completion of the targeted improvement plan, which will hone in on a little bit more here in a second. And those submissions will be through the Plan for Learning platform. In addition to this, you'll have an opportunity to designate whether or not you'll receive supports from your Education Service Center for a vetted improvement partner or from local capacity if your district is in a place to provide that. And then you'll still assign a campus intervention team that will do the needs assessment. And of course, as always, any required trainings will be a requirement to be in compliance with this grant as well. So we'll zoom in on the actual application process, how it looks through eGrants, the one that will be made available to you guys on Tuesday. Remember that each LEA is going to submit one application. That doesn't matter if you've got one campus engaging in the work or 20 campuses, it'll all be populated here in one application. And of course, each part is a requirement. You won't be able to save and submit at the end unless you've gone through each of the schedules and each of the components. So we're going to look at them one at a time. Let me move this. When you start with the applicant designation and certification, part one, you'll click the radio button that you've applied on your own. And then for part two, you'll have an opportunity to list that authorized official. You can select a contact from the drop-down menu if it's already populated, or if there's been turnover or you're new, then you'll be able to just give the contact information for your authorized official, certify and submit. And then that will open up the rest of the application. And from here, you'll start with general applicant information. So you'll list your LEA's name as part of organization information. And then from there, you'll have an opportunity to list a couple of applicant contacts. Again, either using the drop-down menu, or if you've got new folks, you'll be able to enter their information here as well. From there, you'll have the program abstract and needs assessment. Part 1, you'll indicate whether or not you are a charter school. Part 2, you'll discuss whether or not you'll be setting aside a percentage of funds to use at the LEA level. This year, the LEA reserve is capped at 20%. In the past, it's been at 50%. That's a bit lower this year. In part 2, you'll indicate if you're using a percentage of funds, and then you'll also describe to what extent that reserve will be used to support students within a direct feeder pattern of your Title I campuses. And then in part 3, you'll indicate if you'll be using an education service center or an external vetted improvement partner, or again, local capacity building efforts as it relates to each of the ESF prioritized actions that your district has selected to work on for the 22-23 school year. After this, it'll take you to equitable access and participation, where you'll have a chance to indicate either no, we don't have any barriers that exist, or yes, we do have barriers. And if that's the case, you'll be able to add lines as needed to give a short description of those barriers. Language, transportation are often big ones, but you'll have an opportunity to think through if and what barriers exist for students as it relates to programming that's through this grant. And you'll just indicate those here. Next is the budget summary. And so this is where you'll see in part 1, the final amount for the campuses that are awarded those $43,000. As a reminder, carryover will not populate here from the 21-22 grant until about January of 2023, in which case you will be able to come back, make an amended budget. But for now, you'll just be budgeting the final award amount as it relates to 22-23. And then as you complete part 2, you'll indicate the amount of funds that you are allocating to each budget object code. So payroll, professional and contracted services, all the way down the line. If you come to a gray line, those are unallowable via this grant. So they'll be grayed out. It won't let you add any amount to that line. And then from here, oh, my apologies. I do want to note that pre-award is allowable anytime from August 1st to whenever you submit your application. Pre-award costs will be allowable. After the budget summary, the next 3-4 schedules will zoom in on each of those object codes. So you'll have an opportunity to talk a little bit more specifically about how you anticipate utilizing those payroll costs that you've set aside. So first, you'll just indicate the total amount that you have designated to payroll itself. And then in part 2, you'll have an opportunity to indicate the type of positions that will be funded via payroll. So whether or not there will be administrative or clerical support, and then if you have any LEA positions, or what, if any, campus positions you intend to use from payroll through your school improvement grant. In part 3, you'll indicate whether or not your school is using, or your district is setting aside payroll funds for substitute, extra duty, or benefit pay, and you'll be able to check those boxes accordingly. And then the last part before you save and continue the payroll schedule is just a certification that confirms you understand that the positions you're funding through payroll are reasonable, necessary, and allowable through the grant guidelines. Once you save and submit payroll, it'll take you to the professional and contracted services. In most instances, all of the professional and contracted services may fall into the second to last line, 6,200 costs that don't require specific approval. If you've got any budgeted costs that fall in lines 1 or 2, you'll be able to indicate that there. And then of course the total will populate as your total appeared on the budget summary for the amount of contracted services. Parts 2 and 3 aren't visible because they don't apply to the funding source for this grant. So it won't ask you to do anything there. And then once you have finished, you'll save and continue. And it will skip over supplies and materials because there isn't any specific designations you need to make. Whatever the dollar amount is the dollar amount you'll have. But it'll take you to other operating costs. Again, most costs will just auto-populate into the second to last line if they don't require specific approval. But if you do have any indication of out-of-state travel or educational field trips, you'll be able to insert that amount in the first and third line. Again, if a line is gray, it's not allowable. So for example, you won't be able to insert anything in travel for students to conferences because that's not something that this grant deems an allowable cost. From here, you'll save and continue. It'll prompt you to this message. You won't be filling out a budget schedule for 6,500 because capital debts are not applicable to this grant. So you'll just acknowledge that and move on. And you'll receive another great message as a reminder that 6,600 capital outlay is another form that's not necessary as it pertains to this grant. So you'll acknowledge that. And it will take you to a checklist of provisions and assurances. So you'll go down the line, certify that you'll be in compliance with fiscal guidelines, with program guidelines, with the provisions and assurances of the grant. And then of course, you'll make the same statement that you won't be spending the appropriated funds for lobbying. And then from here, you will save and continue. Once all elements of the application have been filled and reviewed, you'll be able to submit. If at any point you did have a line item filled out that requires prior approval, in this case, things like out-of-state travel for employees or educational field trips, you can visit this link here for disclosures and justification forms that you'll submit to the appropriate email addresses at TEA, and then you'll wait for approval there. Okay, so that was part 1 of our application process. Remember that LEA will complete that application in its entirety for all of the campuses that are engaging in school improvement. From this point forward, we'll kind of zoom in on the second piece of the school improvement application, which is campus specific and is found in 806 or Plan for Learning, where you'll find that web-based targeted improvement plan. In a second, we'll move into the logistics of navigating from screen to screen, but we did just want to offer a reminder that your school district should be very thoughtful on how the school improvement grant works as a resource and capacity builder when developing the TIP. And each of those areas of targeted improvement that a campus is working on for 22-23 should have funding sources as applicable that helps connect these dollars to the work of that campus. And we'll talk more about that here in a couple of slides. But essentially, once the campus logs in to Plan for Learning, this kind of begins the process for their campus specific budget. They'll want to make sure that they're in the correct school year, 22-23. And then from there, they'll click on the Essential Actions tab on the left-hand side of the screen. And it will prompt them to the budget screen over on the right. If for whatever reason this isn't in view, you can click on the money icon and that will extend the screen to the left. So if for whatever reason, again, you can't see that, once you click on Essential Actions, click on the money icon and it should preview that for you. And then from there, you'll be able to edit the budget object code itself. As a reminder, these won't populate on its own. The campus leader will have to come in and designate their dollar amounts as it relates to their specific budget from the overall LEA school improvement grant that was awarded. So they'll come in, they'll edit the budget object codes for their specific funds. And then of course your total doesn't need to exceed the funds. Wait until carryover has been populated and then come back in. We can make an adjustment here to compensate for any additional funds that were 21-22 carryover. From here, they'll save their campus budget. And then it will always be populated over there on the right-hand side, according to whatever numbers they may have entered. So now we get into actually linking the funds to each of the action items as it relates to dollars being spent. So in order to do this, again, make sure that that essential actions tab is open and you should be able to see the 4 cycles. Since we're obviously starting at the beginning of the year, they'll open up cycle 1 using that plus sign. And from here, they'll be able to see what, if any, essential actions are already populated. And then each essential action will have individual action steps. And this is where you'll be able to potentially link funding sources. So once you open up the essential action and once you've opened up the actual action step, you can start to think and consider if this action step has a dollar amount that should be linked to it. So examples that we've given in the past are things like professional development, and then thinking even deeper to say, okay, does my professional development require my teachers to be outside of the classroom setting while the school day is in session? If so, perhaps I need to link a funding source that's connected to substitute pay. And so just think through those. If you've got another action item that doesn't really require funding, it's not obligatory here. Just make sure that if there is a way to connect a dollar, that you're being mindful to link those here. Once you've given the resource needed and the dollar amount, you'll be able to click the blue add funding source button and it will save there. All right. When we think about linking funds to the targeted improvement plan, avenues to do so are, of course, engaging with a vetted improvement partner or collaborating with your education service center. Your DCSI should really work to build and maintain a close working relationship with the LEA business manager. That way we kind of take the world of those doing the work and the world of those crunching numbers and bridging the gap between those two entities to make sure that, again, we're connecting dollars to the work of the grant. And then as a reminder for the LEA reserve, this year up to 20% of funds for the school improvement grant can be reserved at the LEA level, assuming that you're serving students that are in one direct feeder pattern to that Title I campus awarded the SIG. And then for the ESF grant, it'll be up to 30% for LEA reserve. Okay, we'll wrap up with takeaways and a timeline. One important thing to consider is please remember to close out your 21-22 school improvement grant if you're participating in that. You'll be able to document the funds that you did draw down. You'll describe any activities as they relate to the LEA reserve, and then you'll have an opportunity to update contact information as well. And then you'll certify, you'll submit, and complete that first before accessing the 22-23 application for SIG. As a reminder, when we're thinking about what's going on in eGrants and what's going on in Plan for Learning, both of these designate school improvement funds either to the district or to each individual campus, and both of them are required as part of the school improvement grant. When we're thinking about eGrants, this is used by the school district, one application for all of their campuses that are engaging in school improvement, and then it shows a district budget summary, whereas in Plan for Learning on 806, It's used by campus leaders. It'll show campus-specific budget allocations that connect to their targeted improvement plan action steps. So it's just a differentiation in scope. And then here's our timeline. The actual application, again, opens up next Tuesday at that $43,000 per campus amount. The location of that app is in eGrants. Your initial budget submission in Plan for Learning with the Targeted Improvement Plan, excuse me, is September 30th, so the end of this month. And then the grant application will close at 60 days. So you'll have until November 12th to make sure that you filled that out and submitted it through eGrants. You'll have carryover that will be finalized no later than January of 2023. Again, an eGrants, and it'll prompt you to do a budget amendment. And then your mid-cycle check will occur in Plan for Learning through each campus's targeted improvement plan in March of next year. And then the grant, as always, will go through September of 2023, in which case you'll then be prompted to do the next closeout and compliance report through eGrants. And that is what we have for you. I am not sure what questions were asked in the chat, if Alice needs to voice over any of those, but we'll also just give this, give you guys an opportunity to ask any questions if you haven't already done so.
Hi, my name is Jolanda Vasquez and I'm from CCISD. I have a question. If I'm in year 2 of the SIG grant, do I still need to submit the application?
Year 2 of the SIG grant or year 2 of the ESF?
Well, that's where.
Ilana, you're in year 2 of your comprehensive identified status.
Yes.
You'll still need to submit the application. So,
but we've already received SIG money in the past, like where we have the grant, and it needs to be spent by December, right?
The grant program ends on 9/30, so you can expend funds up until 9/30 of 2022 for last year's grant. And then the LEA has 90 days to submit their final expenditure report. So 90 days from 9/30, which is the end of December, to submit final expenditures. You will, however, if you have an entitlement, you'll need to apply for the grant for 22-23. Again, it's only a single year grant program.
Okay.
Each year you have to apply for the funds.
And we're eligible though, again, because we're still in comprehensive needs.
If your campus is Title I served and has a comprehensive federal identification, you'll receive an entitlement. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, can you all hear me?
Yes.
If there's a comprehensive identified campus, but they were receiving funds in 21-22, but now in the current year, 23, they have merged with another campus. How do we go about allocating funds to that campus?
So the entitlements are created. Sarah, do you mind if I jump in?
Yeah.
The entitlements are created based on the CDCN of the campus that received the comprehensive identification label. So if your campus is merged and retained the CDCN from your comprehensive identified campus, they'll be eligible for grant funding. If they merged and retained the CDCN from an ineligible campus, you won't receive the funding.
And what if they merged with another campus, but they didn't keep either of those numbers? They have a new one now.
Yeah, you won't, then that campus won't have a federal identification of comprehensive because it will be a new CDCN that didn't receive accountability data.
Okay, even if we know that the needs are there.
Right.
So does that mean that we have to wait until there's data for that newly created campus to see before they can receive funds?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. There's still a couple of questions in the chat I'm getting to. If if anybody has any questions, feel free to jump off mute and we can answer those. Sarah, if you don't mind, would you go back to some of the first slides? I think a lot of the questions are coming in about the dollar amount. If you'll land there, that would be helpful.
Sorry.
You're okay.
These quick. Yeah, I don't want anybody to, get seasick. There we go.
So as a reminder, the Title I 1003 grant is a LEA level grant. So every entitled campus in a district will receive $43,000 in an entitlement that will roll up to a total amount for the LEA.
I have another question. Do you all hear me?
Yes,
So you all mentioned about the carryover. So if those campuses that were previously comprehensive but have now merged and are no longer entitled to receive SIG funds, what happens with the carryover funds? Are they now divided amongst the participating campuses that are part of the SIG grant?
Thanks for that question, Elizabeth. So because this is an LEA level grant, any unencumbered funds from the previous grant year will be recaptured at the LEA level. So if you had a campus that exited or you lost that CDCN of an eligible campus and you still have remaining eligible campuses for an entitlement in 22-23, the carryover will be placed at the LEA level, and then you may distribute those funds to your eligible campuses for the 22-23 school year.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So I have a question. What if only one of your what if only one of your campuses are in the situation to be able to eligible to receive the grant? Would they just be the ones that's awarded the 43,000, or is that a LEA decision?
They're the ones, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Sarah.
They're the one that would be awarded the 43,000. But again, if there's carryover or if you guys decide to retain 20% at the LEA level, then you would be able to distribute that 20% to any direct feeder pattern campus. So if it's a middle school that's eligible, 20% can be used to serve students that from elementary schools that directly feed into that campus, or to high school students that directly feed out of that campus.
Thank you.
Can I clarify that? Was that the LEA reservation that can go for that?
Yes.
So 20% can go to a different campus, but it's your 20% LEA reservation.
So long as they're in a direct feeder pattern of the campus that was actually awarded the 43,000 allocation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And also
Yeah.
Title I served. They also have to be a
Yes.
Title I served campus.
Thank you.
And Sarah, this is Cheryl Mills. I had one more question, and you might have answered it already. I got on late. What is the date that we can go back to? Like, if we spent some money now, can we?
Yeah. Pre-award will be from August 1 until whenever you submit your application and e-grants, which will open up on Tuesday.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And going back to the feeder pattern, so it can be, all of our campuses are Title I. Our SIG grant will be from a campus that's 3 to 5. So we can use the 20% for K1 or 2. It's not just 2 or not just 6 on either side of the campus. It's all the way if they all feed into one another and they're all Title I.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
So Beth, let me be a little more clear there if you don't mind. So if you have a standalone campus that's a grade 2 only campus,
It's K2.
Okay, yeah, then the whole campus can use the funds to close the gaps. But
Okay.
if there's separate campuses, like if your grade 2 is a single campus and then K1 is a different campus, that's outside of that one level.
Gotcha.
That makes
Okay, so it's just one level, but it's all the levels in that one level.
All the grades within that one level.
One level.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And then it's above and below.
Correct. Both directions.
Excellent. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Sarah, would you flip really quickly to the application portion that has the check boxes for capacity building right there? Back one. There you go. So somebody had a question about if you're required to use a vetted improvement program. And the short answer is no, you're not required through this grant program to leverage capacity building through either your ESC VIP, which is TIL or PBIS, or an external vendor for VIP services. We know that those are best practices, and data-driven results come from those capacity building efforts. You're not required by this grant program, but we do want you to name in the grant program if you intend to use those services, so that we're able to better align our conversations throughout the tip submission cycles around those capacity building efforts.
So I had a question in reference to the diagnostic. Is that an allowable activity in this grant?
Absolutely. So part of the grant program, so a requirement of the SIG grant is that campuses receive a diagnostic every 3 years. So if your campus received a diagnostic, that would be in the spring of 2019, this would be their 3rd year, and receive a new diagnostic. Those costs that are for the 3-year cycle that are required diagnostics are covered by your ESC. And we grant them some funds to support you in those required diagnostics. If your campus had a significant amount of turnover, there are some extenuating circumstances, or you guys just want another diagnostic inside of that 3-year cycle, you can choose to opt in essentially for a new diagnostic. And then that can be a covered cost by this grant program. But if you're only meeting that 3-year expectation, your ESC will cover those costs for your diagnostic.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. I have a question. One of our campuses that is comprehensive is an alternative education campus. And so our feeder schools are not really feeder schools. They're more of a lateral move from a junior high and high school. So if we wanted to, or I had plans to use some of the 20%, could we use that on our junior high and high school, that students would be placed basically from those schools onto that alternative education campus? How would that look?
Deborah, that's a great question. So if that, it's a convoluted answer too. So if that's the feeder pattern for your district, right? The district determines what that feeder pattern is. And those campuses are Title I served that are moving into that alternative education high school, they would be considered in that feeder pattern. So it's really the district's determination of what the feeder pattern is there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Linda, I see your question about a campus with fewer than 100 students. That is correct. I will connect with you offline about how you can request that exemption from tip requirements. One more, Sharif West. You should not have to pay for Plan for Learning. As part of this grant program, if you engage in this grant program for your comprehensive campuses, the access to Plan for Learning, the 806 platform for your web-based tip submissions, will be paid for from alternative sources. You don't have to pay for those. If you would like to use some of these grant funds to support feeder pattern campuses engaging in the 806 platform and creating targeted improvement plans, you can use your grant for those campuses, but engaged campuses won't need to pay for your Plan for Learning access.
By chance, are those the same account codes as last year?
Account codes for you
For
did
SIG.
806 login?
For the SIG, no, I'm sorry, for the SIG, the grant funding?
The budget object codes, the 6100. Yes, those are the same. Those are standard for grant programs. And same, Catherine, your plan for learning question about getting multiple people access. You'll submit a ticket to add access points through the 806 platform to get folks added there.
What will be the funding source code for this grant?
Excellent question. It is the same as last year's. Let me make sure that I'm not going to tell you a story about what that fund code is, and then I will let you know.
It's 212.
Thank you. Who was that jumped in?
Huntsville ISD.
Thank you.
Wait, can you please clarify that? I thought fund source 212 was the migrant program. Are we talking about the SIG? Isn't it 211?
I thought it was 211.
Ooh, it is 211.
Yeah,
I said
212
thank
is
you.
migrant.
Clearly. Yep, 211 is correct.
Oh my God, you scared me. I thought I had been using the wrong one.
Sorry, I thought 211 is Title I.
It is, they make it confusing.
We use a sub-object local or a local code to differentiate between Title I and Title I SIG.
And that must be what we do as well then.
Lisa, thanks for your question. So it's not a requirement that the LEA reserve up to 20% at the district level. It's just an opportunity to help build capacity at the district level and also support closing the gaps at those feeder pattern campuses that we know exist, right? For a student entering that comprehensive campus and then exiting there. So you don't have to reserve those funds, but it's a flexible option in this funding opportunity.
When can we expect to be able to get a copy of this PowerPoint?
Good question. We're going to get the slide deck posted as soon as possible. The recording has to go through a little bit of an accessibility check to the IT department. And then we also have to load it into YouTube before we can post the link. So that might take another day or two, depending on the IT's capacity. But I hope to have it up before the grant launches on Tuesday.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. I shouldn't have said me. We and Sarah mostly will have this up for everyone.
No, you can do it. You can send it off.
Oh, Miss Shen, do we recommend that you apply for the grant even if you have sufficient Title I and ESSER funds to address the campus needs? That's a heavy question. That's a big question. I think I would not ever recommend somebody to not take available funding if it's there and leverage it for some additional supports, right? If your campus is comprehensive, there's always an opportunity to use these funds directly to support some of those capacity building efforts, right? Leverage a VIP service, specifically TIL with your ESC to help build adult-led systems changes on your campus. But that's a district decision. But I would never recommend somebody turn away funding for campuses and kids in need. I think I captured either questions in writing in the chat or folks that came off mute, or I answered those orally for folks that dropped them in the chat. We're happy to hang out and answer questions if you have individual things. Go ahead, Randy.
Just to address that last question, if someone did not accept the funds, they would still be required to go through the tip writing process though, correct?
question, Randy. Thanks for that clarity. Yes, so just because you're not applying for these funds doesn't mean that you don't have to do required federal interventions. So you'll still be required to submit a tip, participate in all federally required interventions associated with that accountability manual and assessment framework laid out by the Division of School Improvement. So the funds are a bonus add to those requirements and don't opt you into those required federal interventions. Like I said, happy to stay on and continue to answer questions if anybody has them. Otherwise, we will post the remainder of this recording in the webinar as soon as possible. Thanks for joining today, everyone. And feel free to stay on and listen to everybody else's questions if you'd like, but we don't want to keep you hanging just to hear questions if you're not in need.